Is your e-commerce business prepared for what's about to come? Donald Trump is about to be back in office, and there's potential new policies that could affect your business. We're talking about skyrocketing tariffs to supply chain problems, and the rules are clearly shifting fast, and your profits may be on the line. But of course, don't panic yet, because in this video I'm going to be clearly breaking down what could potentially be happening in a very concise, easy to digest format, so you can be prepared with the adequate time you need to stay ahead of the curve and make sure it doesn't negatively impact your business. So I'm going to be linking all the articles in the video description down below. And first we're going to be talking about tariffs. So this article on Market Watch covers it. It's talking about the new tariffs which are going to be imposed. For example, we have tariffs on imports. We have 10% tariffs on all imports and up to 60% tariffs on products specifically from China. So this might lead to, for example, higher cost of goods, lower margins and higher prices for customers. So it's also going to negatively affect the customer experience if these come into effect. We also have this article here from Reuters talking about the trade policy following Trump's election victory. So I'd give this a read too. Some of the things this talks about, for example, is potentially revoking China's trade status. And what would this do if this comes into effect? Well, it could obviously complicate product sourcing first of all, because the Trump administration allegedly wants to revoke China's normal trade relations status, which will of course lead to higher import duties and restricted investments in the US from those parties from China, right? So this could complicate product sourcing, it could cause supply chain disruptions, and it will increase operational costs as a whole. Back onto the Market Watch article, this also covered a few different things. Now I'm not going to be reading and reacting to this article for you, I'm just going to be referencing which articles I got this research information from, and then you can click on them in the link down below to obviously reference them yourself, kind of like a little bit of a bibliography. But the next thing is potential trade wars happening and also global supply chain disruptions. So higher tariffs obviously could provoke a retaliation of measures from affected countries who have those tariffs put on them. This could of course, in the worst case scenario, spark some kind of trade war. It could disrupt global supply chains in general. The effect it would have is causing delays, and this would incur increased costs for us as e-commerce businesses and dropshippers dependent on those international suppliers. So it's going to negatively affect all those parties, right? And back on the Reuters article again, this also talked about some interesting things. So as we're moving on, we're going to be covering changes in trade agreements. So Trump potentially might want to, as we've heard, reassess and possibly negotiate some of the trade agreements that are already in place, of course, to favor US interests. He wants to make US stronger. He wants to, as I quote, make America great again, which he always talks about. And changes to these could obviously affect the ease and cost of importing goods from neighboring countries, because this isn't just obviously going to affect China, it's going to affect countries where those trade deals are actually modified or maybe introduced in a different way. So it would impact operations, of course, for people who source products from these regions too, and not just China. So when we're thinking about like a backup plan, it's not just China that's going to be affected, it's obviously going to be all different countries. Of course, with any new presidency, it's not just Trump's, all the policies do affect things to a certain degree. And an interesting website here, Ecom Cruise, this is obviously talking about the impact of Trump's re-election on e-commerce. So this is a similar thing like what I'm covering in the niche of e-commerce. And what they're talking about here as well is currency fluctuations. So the impact of how the price and movement of the US dollar and its value affects e-commerce and business and just general operations. So the new administration's trade policies could obviously impact the value of the US dollar. Currencies are always fluctuating, obviously that's how people make money in things like Forex. I personally think the US dollar will be stronger, of course, if he's trying to bring in all these policies to make the US generally as a stronger nation. You would think that the US dollar would become more powerful, but in a situation where it may potentially lead to a devaluation from the dollar, we've always got to think about the worst case scenario. If the US dollar drops in value, dropshipping and e-commerce businesses may face getting obviously reduced profits from US sales, specifically due to that lower exchange rate, which may come into effect because it's devalued. So of course, if the dollar does go down, then you will obviously make less profit technically, but I would imagine if it does, that'd be more of a short-term effect. I think over the long term, I think the US dollar is going to still stay strong. And also allegedly, we would also also expect the US to protect its interests and make sure the dollar's number one by any means possible, as we've seen across history. Not going to speak any more on that issue, but I'm not really concerned about the viability of the US dollar over the long-term horizon regardless. And then obviously as we move on to this article, this is the Reuters one again, talking about trade policy, but what I'm going to talk about here is increased logistics and compliance costs. So those higher tariffs which we mentioned and more stricter trade policies may lead to logistical costs such as shipping and storage fees also being much higher. Businesses may start to experience and face more complex compliance requirements, so this would make the adjustments to supply chain strategies a necessity for you to focus on to try and skirt around this issue, and increasing operational expenses would also be expected here as well. So now we're going to move on to the later part of the video, and in this segment we're going to be talking about what can you actually do to prepare as an e-commerce business owner, or generally just an online business owner if you're watching this because it interests you as a topic, and what can you do to obviously offset some of these risks that may potentially come into effect, because obviously as with any new global policy change they can also affect a lot of things. First of all, I'd say diversify suppliers. You could explore sourcing products from countries which are less affected by US tariffs. This would of course mitigate those risks associated with higher import duties, but like I did mention before, we do need to kind of take into consideration that China is going to be the number one target of course, but those trade agreements with other countries are going to kind of affect import duties and costs as well, so you need to weigh up like the pros and cons of that and which to focus on. And with investments, usually to mitigate risk you would diversify yourself in a portfolio, right? You'd have like different suppliers. You can do that if you're a brand, for an example, but as a dropshipper it's a little bit less convenient to have a supplier in the US and then a separate one in China, because you're going to have two different costs, okay? So it can be a little bit harder, but obviously brands and more established businesses could try and have suppliers in different places if you can get like a similar cost of goods. That would be a way to obviously mitigate risk with that, but I would just focus on having a backup option in the situation to your main supplier. I think that would be the best play here. And the next one would be just to try and adjust pricing strategies. Okay, you need to maybe consider revising product pricing to actually account for higher costs while still trying or attempting to stay competitive in the market, because of course when we're selling a product we're obviously going to always split test the price when we're testing it, and we want to find the highest price that someone's willing to pay for it. Now if we want to increase the price to obviously account for things like import duties and taxes, there's only going to be a certain price people will be willing to pay for. Okay, there's always a ceiling to the price what the market is willing to pay for an item or some kind of good, right? So it's going to affect the conversion rate of your products and if you're actually going to be able to still sell them. So this is a big thing. So pricing, we can't always get away with modifying a price and still remaining profitable, but you need to kind of have a look into this. Can we raise the price a little bit to account for certain things if necessary when the time comes? But of course it hasn't come into effect yet. And just generally stay informed. I wanted to make this video because I was inspired of course by a few videos by other channels in the space, but a lot of them didn't cover the complexities that I wanted to kind of bring across in this video, and a lot of the pointers and the advice, they kind of just blanket it as a fear-mongering approach where you should beware, all this bad stuff's going to happen, and then they want to like promote something. But I want to talk about what you can actually do, actionable steps, and how to prepare yourself. And the best thing is just to keep up to date on those policy changes. I don't know if I will make another video on this. I think it's a really interesting topic. I think to make a ton of videos on it now is obviously fear-mongering, but it's good to look to the future and try and prepare for possibilities that could happen. But just try and be well read on trade negotiations and possible potential changes to policies coming in the future to then adapt your strategy so you make sure you're staying ahead of the game. And then I think to close out, probably the last tip I would say is to enhance supply chain resilience. So like we talked about with diversifying the suppliers, try and develop some kind of contingency plan, in my opinion, to address those potential disruptions in the supply chain, which is of course going to potentially result from the policy shifts or trade conflicts which could maybe happen, right? It's all a maybe, it's all up in the air, but it's of course really good idea to have a plan in action to fall back on. So what do I think is the long-term time horizon? Of course, a presidency is always going to last 4 years per term. I believe that's how they refer to it in the US. But presidency is usually a 4-year term, right? And I think dropshipping is going to hit its peak over the next 4-year term. And I think this is the best time to start right now with dropshipping to get ahead before the golden era comes. Because right now we all know that in terms of things like crypto and the markets, those things are coming up to a bull run. Everything's going crazy right now. There's big activity. And I think in e-commerce, that's going to be certainly the case as we move forward in time. And I think right now it's a great time to get started because everyone's always making these clickbait videos about it being dead, but I only started again like at the very start of this year and I got the most results this time round. So dropshipping is definitely not dead. I think now's the best time to start. It's a little bit different to it was before, but starting a brand or just starting a general dropshipping store is a great idea right now. You can check out the link down below as well. I will include a link to my full free blueprint guide. It was a video I made, I think it was like around an hour. It's like 50 minutes to an hour, completely free, on how I made some serious figures of revenue this year in dropshipping. I'll link it down below so you can watch that completely free. Also, if you want to take things more seriously, you kind of click on the link down below too to join the school community. That's if you want to take things to the next level. Maybe you're an intermediate, you want to get to the advanced level, or you want to learn directly from my advanced strategies I'm using, which I don't want to share for free on YouTube because obviously that'd add unnecessary competition in the market, and if I'm not getting anything from it, it's obviously going to hurt me, right? So if you want to join that, you can. That's $1 right now. It's a limited offer. There's a case study in there. I reveal one of my old winning products. You can go test it. If it works for you, you can run it up. If not, you're going to learn how I found a product through the product research method I teach in that case study, how I scaled it, and it'll just show you step 0 all the way to 100 how you can actually get started and scale something once you find it. Whole lot of value in there, whole lot of value in the channel. Make sure to like the video and subscribe. I'll see you soon.